Well, good evening, everybody. This is Ward Jones in the chair this evening. I'd like to welcome our speaker tonight, Graham Fisher. A few words of introduction about Graham. Graham has a lifelong association with inland waterways, during which time he has established a reputation as an astute observer of the unusual and the arcane. He was an inaugural member of the Canal and River Trust and is a trustee of the British Glass Foundation. He was invested in 2001 and is a recipient of Inland Waterways Personality of the Year. More recently, he was appointed a Fellow of the Royal Geographical Society. A staunch black countryman, now based in the isolated Welsh borderlands, he shares an ancient oak building with his publisher Mary, together with a menagerie of critters that tend to come and go as they please. And then the talk, the title, fascinating. Over, under, sideways, down, with a nod to the Yardbirds 1966. I'm not sure whether that means Graham is going to sing for us at some point, but he has sent some helpful notes to introduce the talk, and I'll share those with you. Water, of course, finds its own level. But what happens when the water level is not suited to the task in hand and needs to accommodate differing levels? And what idiosyncratic ways have those same levels been utilized to serve purposes far removed from their original purpose of industrial scale transportation? The answers are as fascinating as they are intriguing, as is this decidedly off-the-wall presentation will demonstrate. If you've got your audio on still, please can you make sure it's switched off? And without further ado, I'll invite Graham to share his screen and share his talk with us. Thank you, Graham.
Thank you very much indeed. Are we all up and running?
We just need your screen share.
I could see the screen share.
Can everybody see the screen share? Presumably, yep. Okay. Oh, carry on, Graham.
Thank you very much indeed. This one is indeed off the wall. Thank you all very much for joining me for a presentation that I think I'll say with some certainty that if I do my job properly over the next hour or so, then you'll most likely never look at the canals in quite the same way again. That's I think I can promise that. I am minded of the daft joke of what's the only cheese made backwards? The answer, of course, is Edam, because that's made backwards. Ah, in the Black Country, we call that humour. This talk is made backwards in so much that one normally writes a book and then hawks the accompanying talk round to sell the book. This one, the way it came about, is backwards. And depending on the success of how this presentation goes over the forthcoming weeks, it may result in a book. I'll let you be the judge of that. But reflecting that when you look back on what you've done over your life, it suddenly comes clear to you just how much of your life you spent doing it. I've been doing this man's game now with inland waterways since I was a kid. And I've learned over the years that if you're writing for a magazine, then you may go on holiday down a canal for a lovely week and decide to put pen to paper, type a brilliant article, take some lovely pictures. I would not fault the quality of what you presented, and you send it, certainly unsolicited, as many people do, to a magazine in the hope it'll be published, and the editor will look at it and put it on the pile of 1,000 others who have written about their holiday that year going down the canal. The secret, or the knack as I've found, is to find an unusual angle, an unusual or arcane subject, which I've tended to do. And I've made a modest success over the years. Let me give you an example. This is an article I did some years ago for a magazine that I wrote for. And this is a picture of two people you can see there. Do these people take the biscuit? The rich biscuit, indeed. Top left is the irrepressible Lady Blount. And beneath her, you can see the Bedford Level Survey, which are actual sketches. I've reproduced these to show that the results were actually recorded by a fellow who, in the 1860s, called Samuel Rowbottom, made a study along the old Bedford Level Canal at Welney. And he, in a nutshell, concluded that the Earth was flat. Now let's compare and contrast that with Cyrus Teed on the right there, or in the middle, should I say, who around the same time, late 19th century, conducted similar experiments with a wonderful device called a rectilineator. And there's a picture of a rectilineator, or what the remains of it. And he did his experiments down the old Illinois drainage canal in the States. And the top right picture shows a result from his rectilineator where the horizon, the horizontal line, seems to be below the surface of the sea. And he concluded from this that unlike Lady Blount and Samuel Rowbottom, Lady Blount was one of his promoters who fervently promoted the idea of flat Earth theory. He believed we lived on the inside of a globe, and there were holes in this globe where the stars and the firmament shone through, and that's where we saw light in the sky living on the inside of a bowl. And I've just put the pictures there to prove that I'm not making this up. These were genuine, well-respected people. The experiment on the left about the flat Earth was knocked into a cocked in a beautiful fashion when somebody disputed this finding and took Samuel Rowbottom, who was in turn defended by Lady Blount, to court to argue the case that you're talking nonsense, the Earth is not flat. And the Crown Court, the civil division of the court, made a wonderful judgment, which was that the wager that had been bet between the men was illegal. They got out of having to make the decision whether the Earth was flat or not by a technicality. But the interesting thing is that to this day, those experiments have never been repeated, and they can't because the old Bedford Level at Waveney has now been rerouted and doesn't exist. How unfortunate. Cyrus Teed faded into obscurity, and when he died, his sect followed him. But interestingly, some years ago, you may remember the Branch Davidian sect and the Waco, Texas siege. A lot of people killed, where some religious fanatic was involved with a cult there that ended up in the FBI raid. There's a lot of Waco siege of Texas. Look at it from about 20 odd years ago. The man who was leading that Texas siege was a man who changed his name to David Koresh. And it's a work in progress, but I wonder if that was a remnant that we can never demonstrate now because the man was killed, of Koreshianity still surviving in parts of America, as in parts of America, the flat Earth theory still does too. So, flat Earth, or do we live on the inside of a globe? Both experiments conducted using waterways. Now, if you've got the average Waterways magazine, the editor is going to snap something like that up as a novelty feature to keep people's attention and a bit of a change from your holiday down the Staffs and Worcester Canal. So do these people take the rich biscuit, or are they just plain crackers? Of course, the canals have attracted their fair share of ne'er-do-wells, nondescripts, dipsticks, sheer Fruit Loops and basket cases. And there's a whole world of wash out there that I've been looking into for the best part of 6 decades. But after that length of time, it's only reasonable that I might fancy a bit of a change. I've done a lot of this now, and I don't know it all by any means, but it's time for a change. So let me show you the last 5 books that I've written that are not about canals. Nothing to do with canals. I've had a break from them and diverted into other areas. And then on the top left is Tales from the Barn. I gave it Malcolm Dick. Thank you, Malcolm, if you're tuning tonight. I thoroughly enjoyed that, and it was a great Philip. I remember that was about 6 or 7 years ago, maybe a bit more. Next one along, in my opinion, which was my essays and contemporaneous notes on current affairs, which just touched on the start of the Trump era, and I made certain predictions in there, which are now sadly, will depend on your perspective, come to fruition. The next one with Mary holding it, there's a book on the Glass Museum that I'm a trustee of, right opposite the Red House Glasgow in Starbridge. For those of you who know it, it's Starbridge Glass Museum, of what I am a trustee, one of the founding ones, as it happens. Been with for years now. The bottom left was a project that I covered for one of the manufacturers there who replicated the blue vase, the Naples vase, and I was the official biographer for it there. I'm signing copies. And finally, my latest book, copies available now, and they make wonderful Christmas gift, friends. A Baker's Dozen, which is my take on aspects of philosophy that I've taken to in recent years, where I've been studying the minds of the great thinkers. And it was Mary's idea, just a few months ago, to take me on a surprise, great surprise trip to the seat of ancient learning, Athens and Greece. And we had a wonderful time there. I have walked where Plato walked. I've been where Aristotle lectured. I had lunch with a professor from Athens University where he graciously talked to me as an equal. He knows far more than I'll ever know. And we chatted over kebabs as equals. And I have sat on the final resting place where Socrates drank his hemlock and took his life rather than compromise his principles. Lesson there for us all in the modern world, I think. And it genuinely moved me to tears just to sit there and contemplate what that man did. And despite all that, what did it end up next by? A bleeding canal. Just can't get away from them. And our taxi driver took us down to the Peloponnese to see the birthplace of ancient medicine and Hippocrates and such like anyway. And there we stopped. You like canals. There we are. And there's the Corinth Canal. Look at that. It's a canal. It's 4 miles long, with 3.9 to be precise, 6 point odd kilometers if you're into that, but 3.9 miles. And it's a whopping great thing, carved through solid rock, and it links the Ionian and the Aegean Sea. And it saves a journey of about 450 miles around the southern Peloponnese. And in recent years, it's not used much now. You can see on the bottom left there, the submersible bridges now, so that vehicles can cross the canal and enable more crossing. It's now a very busy road down to the Peloponnese, the main road down to the south. And our learned guide, remarkable character by the name of Vangelis, not him, this is another one, not the musician, said to me, they used to, no, I can't even do a Greek accent, no one bother trying. They used to use fish skins. Now, a sentence like that can't go unattended for too long. You've got to explain that, mate. They used to use fish skins. Before they dug this channel, the Greeks would take ships from one side of the Ionian Sea to the Aegean to the other, sliding them over fish skins. And I couldn't believe this. And when I've just got to look into this. This is just so left field. I've got to look into this. And there were various tracks there, which you can still trace to this day. And if you look westwards as you are there, down the line of the canal, to the left on the southern side was the start of what's called a Delchios. I'm getting the lingo already. A Delchios. And that actually crossed just into the mouth of what is now the canal and came on the northern side across to the sea. And you can trace both ends of it. And there were several of these going back to the days of the ancient Greeks, where they actually dragged fully laden things and laid the track with fish skins before this was built in the 19th century. It's no longer used commercially. It's now a holiday thing. And I'd hate to be on the towpath there and have to nip up and get a pint at the top of the hill there at the end of the day. It's a very 180 odd feet thick, I think it is. It's a huge thing. But about 4 years ago, a passenger vessel called the Braemar made the journey through there, full of passengers, holiday vessel. The canal there is 84 feet wide, and Braemar is 80. And having steered holiday boats down the River Severn in such conditions with it being that tight, that is a hell of a skillful thing to do. So it's still in use, very difficult to navigate. Normally people are taken through on tugs. But the idea that's been there for hundreds of years in a different form fascinated me. Let's look into that. Hence the start of this talk, where I'm looking into quirks of the waterways, where there are different methods used to either take the canal from one place to another on the same level, avoiding the obstructions that it faces overhead, or artifacts that lift or take the canal up or down those same obstructions. And it's something I've never really given a lot of thought to. But we don't have to go too far from where we're sitting now, for those of you Black Country based, because of course we have the Birmingham Canal navigations where there's plenty of examples of this. You needn't get much past your front door. I'm going to go farther afield than that. But here's a map of the waterways of this country, where you can see we have the Bristol Channel and Avonmouth on the bottom left, and on the right we have the Thames. Up the north to the left we have Chester and the River Dee, Newark-on-Trent to the right, right up Manchester and beyond, and eventually as far as Ripon. On the main connecting system, Scotland, of course, has its own system, and Wales has the remnants of its own system, some parts of which are fascinating themselves, and I'm sitting not too far from now. But if you look at that right where it says Coventry, smack in the middle of that slide, you have got a black dot. And that represents, don't worry if you can't read that rightly, it doesn't matter, because I'll blow it up. That little spot there is actually this. I'll just show you that again, because it's unbelievable. That one spot within the old network across the country is actually this lot. And that is the canals we have in Birmingham and the Black Country. And you can see the black arrows there mark the site of locks, which take the canal from one level to another. We all know what locks are, but it's only when I scratch the surface of this that I realise there's much more to it than just locks and tunnels. We have there Dudley Tunnel to towards the bottom left, just off centre, Netherton Tunnel. So we have tunnels that take the canal or the waterway through the hillside, and the locks that take him over the hillside. All straightforward stuff. Let's look back historically, because that only goes back to the Industrial Revolution. And you'll find that you are really digging deep into the past to come with stuff like this. This is the Grand Canal in China, which at one stage, it was built 500 years BCE, depending on your persuasion, before Christ. 500 years before then. And it linked 5 major rivers together, but basically connected the Yellow River to the Yangtze, and it went for 4,000 miles. And along those 4,000 miles, it had locks, inclined planes, which I'll define more definitively shortly, and all sorts of artifacts. That was 500 years BC, and there's about 1,000 miles of it that's still left to this day. Survives carrying grain between provinces, and it's all a big plan to make Beijing the centre of the known universe, sort of thing. And it's still in use today for carrying commercial cargo and for living alongside it. You can see that quite palatial building on the bottom. They weren't all Chinese, of course. The Romans had their say. This is the Pont de Gard near Nimes in France, which is it's a World Heritage Site now. What a fantastic structure. And that, over the course of scores of miles, dropped a total of just less than 17 feet, I think. They're just a fantastic piece of engineering. That, of course, wasn't used for boats. But there's a suggestion that the Romans did, well, they certainly did make navigational things. The Foss Dyke and the Car Dyke up on the east coast in this country, but they're basically quite flat. They didn't have whopping structures in this country like locks and tunnels that of any significance that we know of. But some years ago, I was actually, and when I saw this picture, it all fit into place. I recall going to where the Norfolk area was having a ring road built. It was a real bottleneck down there. They were building a ring road. And in common with practice these days, they'd found some archaeological heritage there that road building had to stop, giving people a chance to dig it out and excavate it. And I had wind of this. And I went straight down there to Norfolk. And there was something there that was definitely, you could tell by the strata, it was man-made, and the strata of it was laid out and different from the surrounding strata. It was a canal, in other words. And when the archaeologists found something there that was a low heat process, that wasn't Roman glass, it wasn't hot enough for that, it was a low heat process, I ventured to suggest, do you think that could have been a Roman brewery? Ah, said the one archaeologist, that accounts for the bits of barley we've found shed around here. And we got sight of a local brewery on an artificial waterway built by the Romans, which actually was at two different levels if you translated where the outlet would have come on the River Waveney. So perhaps the Romans were at it as well, not there, I accept, but perhaps they were at it as well. But certainly in Europe, on the left, we have a contrivance for lifting boats with counterweights, and that's from Venice in the 16th century. Da Vinci had his finger in a lot of pies, and this sort of thing would have been one of them. There's no question about it. More recently, it has to be more recent because that's an actual photograph. In the 19th century, this was a boat ramp in Amsterdam, now long gone. But the principles were known around Europe, and of course, the Europeans, although we were at the forefront of developing a lot of these things, the Europeans beat us to it, as did other people, like our friends across the pond. This is a stunning thing. This is something I came across, and there was another one like this down at Georgetown, but this is the main one that still survives in bits you can go and visit. The Morris Canal. It connected Delaware and the Hudson rivers, and you can see the locks on the top left and the size of the boats that they carried, and the bottom as well, the chamber for the incline plane going up the slope there. And on the right, the buildings that controlled the plane. This is the incline plane number 7. There were incredibly 23 of these, 23 locks. Get it right, 23 planes and 30 locks. 23 incline planes. 23 of this size, huge things. And the reason for it was the burgeoning industrialization of the States and the need to carry coal and goods, exactly the same as in this country, basically, but on a bigger scale. And the problem here going between the Delaware and the Hudson is that instead of the valleys going that way, they're going to build the canal down, the valleys all went this way. So they're up and down across these valleys, resulting in this remarkable structure, very little of which survives. And there's a historian called Makasich, who's a leading light in one of the American historical societies, who describes this thing and mentions that there are bits that survived, but people who abandoned it weren't interested in its preservation. They're of a different ilk or mindset from the English and others, where we tend to pickle these things in aspic if we can and preserve them quite understandably for whatever reason. The Americans weren't like that, so they didn't. But once it had been finished, it was finished with. Steve Jobs, a developer of Apple computers, he was asked some years ago if he could set up a museum of all the machines he'd made since he started in the 70s, and he didn't want to know. So I'll give you the computers and set your own museum up, but we ain't interested in museums. We're going forward. And there's an essential difference, I feel. I'm being very general here in saying this, but the difference between us and the States is where the States do tend to look more positively in the forward direction, but at the expense of their heritage, like this thing here, whereas we sometimes pickle too much in aspic at the expense of not going forward. I won't get involved too much in that argument. But the size of that reminds me of when I was in America and I was going I'm going off piste here, but it's relevant because it amuses me to this day. I was on a Harley, as you do, riding across the States, eventually to visit the Harley factory, have a trip around there. And a group of us were being escorted by the Genesee chapter out of Batavia in New York. And somewhere up there, I can't remember where, please don't ask me to recall it, because it's just 30 years ago. There was a fellow riding by me, and we just there, because if you put the cruise control on, you can steer a Harley with your head on a straight road. And we just booming along the freeway. And we're going over a bridge that's connecting two lakes up in Canada, towards Canada somewhere. And beneath us is a canal. And this canal, between the two lakes, I looked down and there was something about the size of the QE2 passing down this canal. And it took us several minutes to go over this. And this fella said to me if we got over, he says, gee, they tell me you're into this sort of thing back home, aren't you? Back in England? Yeah. What are your canals like? I said, well, they're about 20 feet wide and 5 feet deep. He nearly fell off his bike. He wet his pants laughing. He couldn't believe it, how twee we were, where this was his normal. So the scale is beyond what we can possibly imagine. But when Makasek says that this is America's contribution to creating the industrial heritage of the Industrial Revolution, I think we beat you by a few decades of that one, old pal. So yeah, fair's fair. Anyway, moving on from that, Europe. Some different examples of how you can shift the level of water, and the Europeans have got this. Oh, they've had it nailed for decades. This one is particularly interesting in Montec, in southwest France. There's a network of waterways from France going over towards Austria, Belgium. They're all interconnected, a bit like imagine ours, only on a grander scale. And this is a hydraulic ram, and you can see the structure without water in the bottom right, where there's a ram. Those two trams are pushing a ram where the gates behind the boat are sealed, and they just physically push this ram complete with water up this slope and plump it out the other side. It's incredible, amazing. I think that's the only one of its type, but that is a very unusual hydraulic ram type affair, which sadly at the moment, last time I checked, well, as at 4 o'clock this afternoon, has been out of action. It still is, because one of the trains has broke down, but it's still very popular, still used for commercial stuff as well. Here is a boat incline in action. This is from YouTube, so we'll probably have some advert to start it with, which I'll go through if we do.
A pretty girl downstairs is throwing away a plant. Let's wait until she leaves and pick it up to bring home. This is a money trip.
Let's skip that. There we are. How about this for a contrivance? Isn't that amazing? You get the idea from that. Just moving quickly on, it brings it over the top and plumps it in the water the other side. That's very much a tourist attraction these days. It's not used much commercially. But as you can see from the comments of Gloria there, Muito bom esse navioli. And you just can't argue with facts like that, can you? Impressive stuff. Very unusual. The more modern variation is this. This is Strepithew. And this monster here was built only a few years ago. And you can see the size of the peniches and the boats to the left of the top photograph. This thing was part of a modernization program where it became law under EU regulations. Good job they didn't apply them here. where the canals had to be capable of carrying up to 1,350 tons, I believe it is. 1,350 metric tons. The previous limit was 750, I believe. Anyway, it's a massive expansion program to develop the waterways, again on this network between France and Belgium and Austria. Streppy Thew is a huge thing that you can go on a public trip or commerce or just go and look at it. It's very impressive as a tourist attraction. It attracts hundreds of thousands of people here just to look at it. Ronquier is another inclined plane where this time we have a slope with a boat in it. It's not being rammed up. It's actually a separate caisson. You can see in the bottom picture, caisson or waterproof container where the boat is sealed off at either end in its water. Unlike the ram where it's rammed up all in one, this is taken up piecemeal and then dropped off at the other side. So quite developed in the continent. Historically, we've got something to be proud of. The top there, that image there shows a flash lock, and a flash lock, unlike the locks we're familiar with on our canals and waterways, well, rivers. Unlike the pound lock where you go in and lower down and come out the gate at the bottom, flash lock was just a series of paddles and rhymers, they call them, that were lifted up to once a head of water built up to let, even that's only a sketch picture at the top, but even that you can gather the terror that it must have been for somebody going down that lot after a head of water built up. Problem there is that in summer levels the water didn't build up and the mill owners complained because they were being starved of water. In winter it was flooded, so it wasn't very efficient really till the advent of the modern locks we now know. Abingdon down in Oxford, there is the River Abingdon, the Thames, where you can see signs of a flash lock there in the 16th century. And until recently, sadly, this is removed now. Something we didn't pickle in Aspic, unfortunately. Northmoor Lock in Oxfordshire, there's the remains of a flash lock, and it was removed for health and safety reasons. Nobody was using it. It was just there as an exhibit. What the health and safety concerns were, God only knows, but the powers that be decided to whip it down, and the mechanism below that was lost with it. So, a great loss. But historically, we have a proud heritage of pound locks that goes back to 1566 to 65, 66 stroke, when the canal was constructed and completed. This is actually the River Exe, and it's the Exeter Ship Canal. And this is the first canal in this country that used pound locks. Da Vinci had been messing with them in Italy around about the same time. But this was England and its first pound lock. And you see the lock. The River Exe is to the right, and the canal comes off, goes for a few miles. I think it's 3.5 miles navigable into the town. But there's a movement at the moment to get the bridges lifted so they can get into Exeter, because they were lowered in the 60s. They've got a height now of about 30 feet, which ain't much for a sailing vessel. And the M5 goes across it as well. And there's an unusual feature along in the distance, which is a lock, which is actually a double lock. There's two locks, but it's called the double lock, but it's actually one lock. But it allows boats to pass or go up and down at independently. It works like two separate locks, although it is actually one, a strange contrivance. But it's most famous for being the first one to have pound locks, of which you can see the example there. That goes back to 1566. But if we were to say, okay, Gray, let's nail where all this started in this country, this idea of lifting water from different levels. Where did it start in this country? Let's restrict ourselves to England for a while. And it has to be with this fella here, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with, Francis Egerton, 3rd Duke of Bridgewater. And the tale of poor Francis is that he was the son of Scroop Egerton. What a wonderful name, Scroop. And he was a sickly child. He did the grand tour to try and improve his health. At 21 years old, he was engaged to Lady Hamilton, Duchess of Hamilton. And there was this is the same family that was not Josephine, the Napoleon Hamilton, same family. And they must have been a bit of a family because there was some indiscretion which caused the relationship. She was going off doing her thing, presumably. That was the indiscretion where Francis couldn't be associated with her, broke up, broke the engagement at 21, broke his heart. He actually, to the extent he actually became a misogynist. He'd get prosecuted these days. He became really anti-women, and he devoted himself to the problem that his father Scroop had of getting coal out of their coal mines in Worsley, in Manchester, not Worsley in West Midlands, Worsley, Manchester. And he employed, you can see a little clue what's coming in the background of Egerton on the right-hand side there, the picture. He got together with James Brindley, who was a millwright who became an engineer and died before his time with uncontrolled diabetes. He didn't look after himself, married Annie Henschel, and died prematurely, but a brilliant engineer, although trained as a millwright. And he, together with their agent James Gilbert, produced a canal that came out of the mines at Worsley and went to Manchester and slashed the price of coal that had hitherto been taken by packhorse by, or from pounds a ton to shillings a ton. And there are the mines at Worsley, and that's a lovely picture of one of the boats, or the style of boat that was used to bring the coal out of the mines. And there was actually an inclined plane in there as well. More about that inclined planes in a second, but there was one in there connecting two of the levels. That was called a starvationer because you can see the ribs of the boat there. And although it's nowhere near the dimensions, you can see there the heritage of what we now consider the modern narrowboat. There's his granddaddy. And they produced a canal of 41 miles, the Bridgewater Canal, that was notable for its remarkable flatness. There was an inclined plane in there, but nobody saw it unless you're working in there. Remarkably flat, except for one structure. Brindley's Aqueduct. A brick aqueduct over the River Irwell that we now know as the Manchester Ship Canal. That was developed in the 19th century based on the River Irwell. It's now the Ship Canal. And people, when he announced these plans, were so taken. It's difficult to imagine now that just building that, it just blew people's brains. They called him, they thought he was mad. And they said, there's Brindley building his castles in the air. And when it opened and people gathered there to celebrate it and ships went across and they realized this man was actually a genius and had started something that was going to become the greatest revolution to hit industry, possibly in the history of mankind, the Industrial Revolution. That has now been replaced in the 19th century by the more modern Barton Swing Aqueduct over what is now the Manchester Ship Canal. And that is an aqueduct where you sail in the thing, and the gates you can see lifted at either end to put you in a case on the water, and you swivel around for boats to pass underneath. Sorry, the thing is sealed without the boat, sorry. So swivel around to let boats pass underneath. And then swivel back into position of the caissons for boats to pass through. That's still operating to this day. And last time I checked, it's actually working. Fantastic structure. All basically stemming back to Brindley's day. Round here, if you want to see some impressive features of engineering that lower the level of the water, you may have walked past this at Tipton, Tividale, once or twice yourself, never given any notice to the fact that here is a lock, or more specifically, it's two locks. The staircase, they're called staircases or risers, because if you look at the top left picture, where you can see this gate in the foreground, the gate beyond it in the mid is actually the top gate of the one lock and the bottom gate of the next. So you have to have the water levels equal before you go from one into t'other, shut the gate behind you, and drop down to the low level. 2 locks in one, called a staircase. And there's lots of staircases about. People take very little of this one on the Gower branch. It's the only one on the entire BCN. It's unique, and until recently, they're actually trying to actively shut that branch and fill it in, which would be a shame. But the double locks at Hillmorton are still there, very much being used, and they were an idea to speed up canal travel by building 2 sets of devices to lift the canal and lower the canal between different levels at the same time, thereby speeding up the process of boats. I think, if memory recalls, certainly when I was down there last time, which has been a little while ago now, only the one was in use. They ain't got the other in use. I don't know why. But they're both working locks. And there's 1 or 2 examples of that. The most famous example of staircase locks is the Bingley 5 Rise, top left picture, where there is 5 staircase locks, where the top gate of the one lock is the bottom gate of the next. So it's the Magnus syndrome. I've started it, so I've got to finish. Once you're in there, there's no swapping with the, you're in and you go to the top, or you come down. You can't pass in the middle. There's nowhere for you to pass. And the most famous or most noteworthy narrow locks is on the Worcester and Birmingham Canal, and that is Tardybig. The flight. This is flight. These are not staircase locks. You can see they're separate locks, individual locks. But there's 30 of them. They're very close together. And I had the very great pleasure, I use that word in inverted commas because it was no pleasure at all, of taking a fully laden working boat with 30 odd tons of nutty slack on it, up there on my own from Birmingham to Worcester. And I did it on my own in 2 days. And next time I'll take somebody with me and take it 2 weeks, I think, because it's damned hard work, I tell you. But what a wonderful way of raising the water from one level to the next. And that's the sort of thing that many of us are familiar with. Or perhaps we might be a bit complacent about what we've got. Here's Galton Bridge, Galton Summit, what we now know as Galton Railway Station, which is on the left. Galton Bridge, the big cast iron thing, built in 1826 by Francis Galton, who was named after him because he was chairman of his financial director, not chairman, smack wrists, financial director of the Birmingham Canal Navigation Company. And he achieved great fame. He's a philanthropist. That was named after him. He's a businessman. He was also a eugenicist and believed in crossbreeding people. And he had some strange ideas. And because of that, he's not very often spoken in those terms these days. But he got himself a bit of a bad reputation, really, which is a bit of a shame because he did a lot of good work. And that's part of it. There's a boat come from Wolverhampton to Birmingham. The reason I'm mentioning the Galton Bridge and this is because you can see there 2 different levels of canal. And we have some spectacular examples here of where the waterways are changed in their level by way of things like this. This splendid thing is Engine Branch Aqueduct, built in 1825. Galton Bridge was 26. Yeah. And a wonderful thing that takes one level of canal. Well, how did they get to those different levels? Well, the reason is that here, the city level of water at the top with a curve on the left-hand side, that is the original main line of Brindley's Canal that went from Birmingham to Wednesfield. By 1768 they opened, and by 1772 it had gone all the way through to Wolverhampton, Birmingham to Wednesbury. 1768, 1772, Birmingham to Wolverhampton. The lower level was 1826, a peak year for Telford to make his modification. He did a lot of wonderful things, Telford, but he seemed to have a bit of a banjo year around 1825 and 1826. And he came along, and where Brindley's Canal took more tortuous routes to avoid having to make diversions and cause and create locks and he just followed the contours. They're called contour canals. He went around the contours of the hills. Telford came along and said, That's the way we're going, lads. Off you go. Shovels in ground. And you let nothing stop him. And that dead straight course you see below goes through tunnels. He tried to minimize locks where possible. It goes over aqueducts. So he's keeping the canal on the same level, but negating the effect of the landscape, as opposed to devices like the lifts that use the landscape to change the level. That photograph's a bit misleading there, in so much that you can see the line of trees above, just below the houses there. There's a little few trees, and there's a bit of parched grass. And that bottom of that parched grass is actually Brindley's original level, called the Smethwick level. And that was his original line. It was lowered to improve the line of the navigation to the level you see now. And that's mistakenly called Brindley's own line. It's not. The original line is a few feet above that. And the building there in front of you, if you have all these changes of level, the water tends to find its own level, so it goes downhill. And when it's gone from the top to the bottom of those canals through lock usage, then you need something like a pump to pump it back up again. And there is Brasshouse Lane Pumping Station, now restored, and occasionally open to visitors. We can see this wonderful Tangy engine, I think it is, if memory serves, operating under full steam. And there's another example of something that was used to shift water out of one level to another. Only in this case, it was from out of the mines back into the canal. And that's Cobb's Engine House in Netherton in Dudley, where all our canals in the Black Country area was subject to great water ingress. And the pump house there pumped water out of the mines and in turn kept up the level of the canal and maintained the level. Keeping the canal on the same level and using artifacts to avoid the obstructions. We have 4 tunnels here. Incidentally, the Brindley canals I mentioned that were circuitous and went around the contours, Brindley gets a bit of a bad deal in my book, because it is said he was very inefficient and wasteful in the way he took the canal. Telford came along and knocked the best part of 10 miles off the journey between Birmingham and Wolverhampton simply by making it straighter, and Brindley gets judged accordingly, which is unfair. Because apart from the fact it was many years later, Brindley was the 1760s, Telford was the 1820s. There was also a lot of hamlets about in those days. We didn't have the big city conurbations, and I generally think that Brindley used this canal to also serve these isolated hamlets rather than bypass them in a straight line. These tunnels here are significant in as much that you can see from the shapes that there's a Netherton, Sapperton, Blissworth on the bottom right, and Standage. And that picture Standage is actually a picture I took on the first press trip allowed through the reopened tunnel about 15, 20 years ago. And you can see the shape of the arch, which shows an early tunnel, which is just about the worst shape you can have for a tunnel, because all the internal forces, the radial forces, are concentrated on the shoulders. They're distributed evenly in a circular or more circular tunnel like later Netherton or Blissworth. The earlier tunnels in that shape tended to collapse. And if you look at them, they very often, when they say the roof comes in, it ain't directly above. It's very often just either side where their shoulders are, where the strain gets so much that it pushes the shoulders in and it collapses from there rather than the top. And lest we forget, Netherton Tunnel, Dudley Tunnel, should I say, which is now one of the most popular tourist attractions in the Black Country, using the same line of canal to negotiate these changes in levels above it with Wren's Nest and Dudley Hills above them. Not so long ago, that bottom picture in the 60s shows the train that was destined to be extended into the works to the left. And to do that, they had to build up the embankments, and we're going to fill in Dudley Tunnel. And that's when the conservation people in the early 60s, 1962, Dudley Canal Trust, said, enough. We ain't having this. And ironically, Dudley is now one of the leading tourist attractions in the country on those boat trips, and the train and the railway line have long gone. Here's London-on-Tern Aqueduct, which is a beautiful example of an early structure that took the canal across a river and changed the it negated the need to drop the canal down up the other side. It was the quickest way across the 2 points spanning the River Tern. And this was an early example of a cast iron trough, which was made more famous by Telford's efforts at Pontycelty, which is now a World Heritage Site. How about that for negotiating different levels of canal? Pontycelty, the bridge between two hills, is what that means. And that's the River Dee, and there's the canal being taken across majestically and just defying the drop down into the Dee and up the other side. There's no way you could possibly do a flight of locks down to there and then back up the other side. It had to be an aqueduct. And there it is next to Chirk Aqueduct, which is the juxtaposition of the canal, as you can see from the bottom picture, and adjacent to it at the higher level is the railway. What a beautiful, beautiful sight that is. And were it not for the restoration movement and various other well-meaning people, that could now be what? The Sainsbury's? I don't know. Because it was under perilously close to being shut down and knocked down, that lot was. Look at it. What would we have lost? But here's an interesting thing. I showed you some earlier of what they were doing on the continent and how prevalent they are and what they've done to modernize their system to give us these new artifacts that help they have an integrated transport system over there, for God's sake. They build motorways in conjunction with waterways and railways. It's all we're still piecemeal. We've really lost the plot in our transport system. But this is a relic and the last one left, the only one of its type. But this is our boat lift. This is the Anderton boat lift, which joins the Trent and Mersey Canal with a little spur that you can see in the bottom picture coming off the Trent and Mersey Canal, which runs to the left. And it drops the water down to the River Weaver. And in the distance there used to be ICI Chemical Works, which accounts for why the fumes they were giving off rotted all the metal stanchions at one point, had to be completely refurbished. And at the moment, it's shut for repairs as well. And that, again, is at 4 o'clock this afternoon. It's still closed for maintenance. The visitor centre's open, but the lift isn't working. And that's 50 feet. It was developed and then modified from steam to electric by Edward Leader Williams at the start of the last century, their chief engineer. And I've seen one figure in one book. I couldn't find it. I'd have loved to have shown it you, because it actually says that, and bear in mind, this is a river with variable levels. Somebody had the courage to say that it drops the boat 50 feet and 4 inches to the River Weaver. How on earth did they measure that on a river with variable flow rate? But there you go, 50 feet. It drops and that sadly is our last one left. As indeed are these relics. This was part of the Shropshire tugboat system, a wonderful system of tugboats where the boats were tubs, like skips, basically. Some had wheels, some were taken out on bogies, like the top right picture there. This is the trench incline plane, as was. And there were 5 lots of incline planes around Shrewsbury. And if you drive around Telford, you can still see a lot of signs of them to this day. But the pictures on the right are the efforts of a wonderful chap who's ink tinted them himself by hand to produce those coloured pictures from the old black and white ones. They are genuine pictures. They're black and white pictures that he has tinted in. Isn't that a wonderful sight of the burgeoning industry of Telford and Ironbridge behind, and the incline plane bringing stuff up between different levels? This is probably one that many of you have seen. This is at Ironbridge Museum. This is the Hay incline plane. And that's it as appears now, top left and top right, seen from the bottom and seen from the top. And the top right picture goes straight down to the River Severn. There's a branch that goes to the Coalport Canal, where there was provision to drop stuff from the China works to the river, but there was never actually a physical connection between the two. It just brought stuff up from this higher level down this railroad to the lower level. And at the bottom picture there is a picture of it when it was in action. And to the right there is what's now known as the tar tunnel. It is the tar tunnel, where when they were building that thing, they shoved a shovel in the side there, and out from the ground came a bubbling crude tar, which quickly became exhausted. You can go in there, still get your hands sticky, but it actually oozed tar that they used in roadworks, etc. And that is what you'll find if you look for the Ketley incline plane. That's a fairly modern picture. You can clearly see where it went. And I was doing a talk some years ago where this fella said, I've got this from my granddad. I'd like you to have it. And he gave me that coin at the bottom, shown on bottom left and bottom right. And that's an actual worker's coin from when they paid them in those tokens. And then they could be cashed in at the local shop, where they were the only places they could be cashed in, and everything you bought was an inflated rate, so they'd all back off you anyway. Thank goodness for the trade unions for knocking things like that on the head. But that's an actual coin that is 1779 commemorates. It's in good condition, well, reasonable condition. And sadly, as at 4 o'clock this afternoon, you can get one of those off the internet for 10 quid. But this monster is really off the wall. This is the Foxton incline plane that connected 2 levels of the Grand Union Canal at Market Harbour, because the locks were inefficient. And they would float boats into these trolleys, and they go sideways, because if you put them upwards, then the surge of the water tends to, well, just brings the thing off the rails. So they went in sideways into those caissons, and as one came up, the other came down, powered by a steam engine at the top. And that lasted for just a few years. The engineering wasn't up to it, and the rails cracked, and it didn't last very long. And sadly, that's all there is left to this day. The locks you can see on the far right, they were modernised when the plane went. There is a group there that preserved that site. They were talking about reinstating it at one time, but that's pie in the sky, frankly. And you can see the top centre of the picture, a boat as it would have appeared coming in from the upper level of the Grand Union, to be lowered down to the same level as what the locks on the right would have brought the boat down to anyway. From the far north at Scotland, on the Monkland Canal, which is a branch of the Forth and Clyde, the Blackhill Incline Plane. To the south, right down Cornwall, this is a sad tale. This is the St. Column Canal, or Edivian Canal, named after John Edivian, who had this idea to build a canal in a circular route from Morganporth down to Lusty Glaze at Newquay. And you can see the incline plane on the extreme left of that upper shot, where it was more of a chute lined with wood down which they shoved stuff to fall down into boats waiting on the beach below. 5 miles, most of it never completed, about 2 miles completed in sections. Didn't last very long. And the sad thing was that Johnny Divian put all his money into this all his life, and it eventually broke him. He went blind, and until he died, he was giving guided tours around there as a deranged man who'd lost everything, and failed to give up hope that one day it would make him his fortune. He died a broken man. And there's a plaque commemorating it at the top. This sort of thing you go to Cornwall on holiday, never see it. But what a way of raising, of transporting stuff between one level of water, in this case the sea, to a canal. And the interesting thing about that I found out, that's on the west coast of Cornwall. The stone that is there is the same stone that was used in the potteries of Stoke-on-Trent. Ah. So it was brought down there, shoved onto a boat, brought all the way around the south coast, presumably. They wouldn't have gone up north. Around the bottom, up to the Stoke-on-Trent, Humber, Trent Mersey Canal, down to the potteries, from that spot you're looking at now. The Roll Canal in Devon That is the frontispiece from the Royal Canal Society. I needn't show you any more than that. That's the frontispiece of their society website. A lot of these people have got websites who look after the interests of these things. And you can see that it linked Torrington to the River Torridge. It was pretty impressive in its own right. Its most significant feature was this tidal lock, which was actually on the river some way inland, about 3 miles, I think, quite a way in. And then you got to a lock. Then the river comes in from top left to the middle, and then the canal is the bottom section. Then it was a tugboat canal, but that was based on something that really did blow my mind when I saw it. These sort of people, there's 36 pages there of restoration news of people who are dedicated to maintaining, developing, even trying to reopen this. There's sections of these canals still that you can go and see them actually working. But of course, it'll never be used again as such in its fullness. But the Royal Canal was based on this amazing thing called the Bute Sea Canal, the Bute Canal. And the Bute Canal celebrated its 200th anniversary a couple of years ago. And there's a sea lock coming into a big channel on the top left that goes over to this railway on the right. And since I've got that picture, that's all been reconcreted, it's still there. And that went along to a wharf which had stuff loaded into these big tubs that went along the canal. As it narrowed its gauge, it went into smaller tubs that were on bogies. So arguably a train of these would have been articulated vehicles, perhaps. And the smaller ones went further up, and they supplied largely sand for farmers up in the hills. There's no way they get pack horses with any efficiency with a couple of bags of sand on the back. So they had these comparatively large vessels that took sand as fertilizer up to the hills for farmers. And there's one of the inclines that was at Mount Church, which was powered by steam, and some were powered by water, and on the trees, and it went 225 feet datum top to bottom in 4 minutes. That must have been a heck of a journey on a boat. It takes you 15 minutes to get through a lock on your own. 4 minutes for that journey, 925 feet long. Very impressive structures. What a shame they're not there now. But this, what I found out about this, I just couldn't get my hat on with this. On the Somersetshire Coal Canal, there were various contrivances, not least inclined planes and all sort of manner of things, because of the levels of the Somerset area, where it connected with the Kennington Haven of Dundas. And it was Somersetshire Coal Canal. It carried coal, funny enough. And this was Robert Weldon's hydrostatic caisson lock, which has never been discovered, but they think the site of it is at a place where the canal goes through a sharp bend, and there's a cottage there that's still lived in, and that seems the most likely spot because the you couldn't get locks or anything around it. And have a look at the sketch there, where you've got a caisson in a cistern with water above it, where that cistern is sealed, so you've got water above you and below you, and the whole lot is loaded. The water above is to prevent negative buoyancy, and you take the whole lot down to a bottom level, and gosh, the opening of that, it's like being a coffin. And it actually worked to the extent that two officials came and had the inaugural trip on it, and because when it was going down, the water was slushing side to side with no baffles inside, the boat was banged about. It got stuck. They came close to drowning and meeting their mate in a huge lock, tunnel full of water, inverted tunnel. Oh dear, they must have been terrified. And they got out dazed, confused, absolutely shook to bits, having come close to death, and declared it a fantastic success. And it never got past that. And we can't even find the site now. But we've actually got that diagram and contemporary accounts of the thing in action. But a more modern thing, and this you can see from the posters on the wall, is only a model. This is a more recent development, which is more viable. And this is the diagonal lock, invented by a laddie who has got the idea of shoving a boat in the upper level, sealing the system off, and then dropping it down a diagonal to the lower level. And you can see the holes in the side of the tunnel for people to look through and safety aspect, safety escapes, etc. And that was taken at a meeting of the Lappel Canal Trust only a few years ago. And the bloke who invented it says that he could replace the 5 locks at Camp Hill, making the whole of Birmingham accessible to London by a wide beam waterway for less than the cost of a mile of motorway. And very tragically, Terry Fogarty, for indeed it is he, before he could see his dream fulfilled, he died. What a shame. But that is possible future for locks if we're going to go back to commercial carrying on the waterways, taking boats between levels via diagonal. Meanwhile, back up Scotland for some modern stuff that is working and functional. That is, as many of you will know, the Falkirk wheel. And there's a little lesson I'm going to spout here, because I get on my bandwagon about this, and it's what I call the estate agent syndrome. That is a replacement for locks. The road on the left roughly marks the site of the locks on the Antonine flight, the Roman Antonine. That was going to be called the Antonine wheel to start with. The Antonine wall, the Roman wall, runs just out of the top of the picture there. It became known as the Falkirk wheel because it's a Falkirk. Who'd heard of Antonine? But the locks went roughly up to the left where those cars are, and they were never to be built on, and never to be reinstated. So they built this thing that lifts the canal via a swinging circular lift from one level to the upper one. You can see in the bottom picture the lower level and the upper level. And here are 2 wonderful pictures, one at the daytime, one at night. And what I object to here, and I've sort of had heated discussions with people on this one, is that it's not true. It's simply not true. It's not a true representation. You go to the end of that picture on the top left and look down the other side, and there is the grottiest housing estate you've ever seen in your life. And that ain't me talking. I've talked to people there who say, Och hootsmon, because that's how they talk up there. Och hootsmon, this is the roughest the roughest housing estate I've ever lived in my life. The residents think it's awful. And I've yet to find a photograph of the Falkirk wheel that goes anywhere near showing that. And it's rather like the estate agent showing you all the good bits, but don't show you the bit out the back that you shouldn't really see till you get there. We went there, Mary and I, when it was opened, and we went on a filthy day, expecting to see crowds of thousands. I went to represent the magazine, and there's a big burly security guard come there to the gate, and it's pouring rain. What do you want? As we come for the opening, there's not a soul about. This has been cancelled. Nobody told you. And everybody had been told except me. And we went all the way up to Scotland. So we ended up having a few days holiday there. Went up another time to see it actually opened. But it was vandalised. And we got the short straw. It's all fully working now, of course. But a fantastic structure that represents, I don't know, a way forward. I don't think it's viable commercially. But something this is, I'm going to look at some crazy movers, I've called this little bit. This is just to wind up with something to give you a bit of food for thought. These really are off-the-wall examples of utilising changes to water levels for our good. And at the top there, and I do believe I have a representative from the Trust looking in tonight, and I can't tell you how proud I was to see this because I'm big on hydropower. This was Dudbridge, or is Dudbridge, at the time they were installing a hydroelectric generator on the canal that uses the canal water to generate electricity. Why we ain't doing this, I just don't know. I just get so infuriated that we are not seeing the potential of our inland waterways to generate electricity. Nottingly, there's a twin Kaplan turbine there on the river Weir. Near to me, just down the road, we got to Electric Mountain, which uses the water at the top to power generators to generate electricity, and then at low peak overnight, it gets pumped back up again. And the chart on the right there just shows the percentage of renewables in the UK, and the hydro on the side at 21%. It is way, way below where I believe it should be. Scotland have got it nailed. They got all sorts of hydro plants up there and wind farms as well. They're going to mix it. I'd rather believe Scotland are sort of jumping the Iran situation here and have been for a long time in becoming self-sufficient in their own power, in case and when they get independence, if they do. But that's the motivation there, I'm sure. We are lagging way behind. 21%. We've got all this water. We're on an island surrounded by this stuff. We should be using hydro more. And it really is refreshing to see what Cotswold Canal Trust have done at Dudbridge on a canal. Absolutely brilliant. But I'll conclude with this little thing here, which is Inland Waterways Bulletin, Inland Waterways Association, a big group of volunteers who look after waterways. And that's their bulletin. And you needn't read it because I've picked out the bits here. This says, well-designed water transport schemes have a role to play. Well, what a surprise. I've got a big report on my cupboard here that I put into the Canal and River Trust in 2008, saying exactly the same thing. So nice for catching. But there you go. Water transfers via canals are not new. Yeah. Go through the archives of British Waterways, Canal and River Trust, and you come across this, which is reference to the papers of Jack F. Pownall, who only died in the 70s. So he's only recently, and who's ever heard of him? Pownall, in 1948, came up with these wonderful proposals, 42, sorry, for a Grand Canal linking all the major ports and areas of the country on a waterway of a consistent level. And it would drop down via locks and whatever other artifacts, not inclined planes, we're beyond those now, to other centres in the centre of the country. We were effectively ringed by a level of water, about 100 feet datum, I believe it was, where ships would come off the sea and go round and just drop stuff off into the rest of the country. How many of you, hands on heart, have ever heard of that or Parnell? But I put a pound to a penny that in the near future you're going to, we'll have to as the water crisis increases, and I'll show you why. That is a newspaper article, a genuine picture of us entering a drought area in southern waters from the Observer, is it? Is it Observer? I can't remember where it's from now. Anyway, it's a reporter who's picked up on this, and he has picked up with a reference to 80 years ago of Parnell. That is what we're heading for, and we've got an ideal solution right outside our back doorstep. And if we don't take it, we're going to be in trouble because we are running out of water and we have the ideal solution in front of us. And I found out flicking through examples of Hansard that who should mention this in Parliament as recently as 2022, but one B. Johnson, who sadly wanted to reinvestigate this and then fell out of favour and he's dropped off the radar again. But if there's one thing I'll leave you with tonight, it is that you are going to hear the name Parnell or his project from 80 years ago come into a house sometime near you soon. And on that, I will conclude by saying that I think that you may just look differently on that little bit of canal outside your back door as what potential there is, because wherever your interest is, whatever your line is, it can always be enhanced by the addition of water. Thank you very much.